Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. Global Connections Television is a privately funded, independently produced program. The opinions expressed on Global Connections are solely those of the moderator and his guests. We'd invite our viewers to go to our website at www.globalconnectionstelevision.com to view previous programs. Also, if you're involved with any type of a PBS, a community access television, or any type of media outlet, or perhaps you're involved with an educational institution that has some type of intra-campus television hookup, or you just have a website and you like our shows and you want to share them, please feel free to do so. Global Connections Television is provided as a public service at no cost to help us better understand international issues and how they impact our lives. Today we're going to be taking a look at a very important topic that so often does not get very much coverage, and that is human trafficking. My guest today is going to bring us up to date on what's going on in the United States and around the world. My guest today is Vanessa Chauhan. Ms. Chauhan, who serves as an advisor with the Global Hotline Consulting team at Polaris, is an expert on this topic. Vanessa, welcome to today's Global Connections program.
Thank you so much for having me.
I appreciate you being with me today. Let's start off at the top with Polaris. What exactly is Polaris? When was it formed? Why was it formed? What's its main mission?
Sure. So Polaris is a Washington, D.C. based nonprofit that works on all forms of human trafficking. And our mission is to combat the networks that commit the crime of human trafficking and restore freedom to survivors. We were founded in 2002. And the most important, or one of the largest programs of Polaris, is we operate the National Human Trafficking Hotline, which is a partnership with the federal government.
Now, we hear that term, human trafficking. How do you define human trafficking? Is there a specific definition, or is there a major definition with multiple parts, or how do you define it?
A basic definition is that human trafficking is profiting off of the exploitation of others. Human trafficking is a global crime. It was federalized as a crime through the passage of the Trafficking Victims and Protection Act here in the United States, and it's defined as the use of force, fraud, or coercion to compel someone into the commercial sex trade or into forced labor or services. So
implicit in that is the people who are involved, it's against their will, or they're being coerced for whatever reason. They're being bribed, or they're being perhaps undue duress is applied to them and that type of thing?
Absolutely. So if you think of trafficking here in the United States or even globally, it's defined into three different buckets. So you've got anyone under the age of 18 who is exploited in the commercial sex trade. So any child engaging in commercial sex is a victim of sex trafficking. You have an adult, so anyone 18 or older that is in the commercial sex trade through force, fraud, or coercion. Someone is compelling them to engage in that sexual activity. And then you've got labor trafficking, which is any child or adult that is forced to engage in labor or services against their will through force, fraud, or coercion.
And our viewers can go to your website at polarisproject.org to get more information on what we're talking about today.
Absolutely.
And get some very interesting statistics, and some very important statistics also. Well, you mentioned the Global Hotline. What exactly is that?
So it is a global hotline consulting network is what we're trying to do. And what we strive to do is that we've had over almost 11 years of success operating the National Human Trafficking Hotline here in the United States. And our goal is to scale that success in a global arena and help countries either develop their own national human trafficking hotlines or enhance existing hotlines to better respond to trafficking, so that one day, no matter where you are in the world, you have access to a 24-hour hotline that can assist you or get you assistance out of slavery.
So let's just take the United States as an example. So there's a hotline, a 1-800 number or something like that people can call to report human trafficking if they're being trafficked or if they think human trafficking is taking place.
Absolutely. So this is a hotline that is funded and owned by the federal government. It is owned by the Department of Health and Human Services, and they give us a grant to operate the hotline. So we've been operating the hotline since December 7, 2007. It is a multimodal, 24-hour-a-day, 365 days a year lifeline for survivors who need assistance leaving their trafficking situation. And we are also a national data hub, and we are a great resource to the field at large.
What is that number?
It is 888-373-7888. We also have a text line, which is 233-733.
Okay, we want to be sure and put those in the lower thirds.
Please
just
do,
in
that'd
case
be
somebody
great.
missed them, we want to make sure, and we'll mention them a couple more times probably. Well, when we talk about human trafficking, so often we refer to, it seems like the number one spot that people refer to automatically is Thailand or the Philippines, but does not human trafficking take place in virtually every country of the world? Or is, I'm sure some countries have more of a problem with it than others, but where are some of the more, let's say, some of the heavier areas of human trafficking as opposed to some of the countries that have less human trafficking?
So trafficking happens everywhere. As you said, it's a global issue. And a lot of times, and over the past years, a lot of people have thought that it's an issue that happens far, far away, especially here in the United States. No one ever believed that it happens here. One of the issues about this issue is that it is a hidden crime. It is a covert crime. And so data is not readily available because victims don't self-identify. And so the numbers are not there. And in fact, in the United States, we don't have a national prevalence study for what trafficking looks like here in the United States. But if you look at some of the reports, a lot of the countries that are referenced for having high prevalence are Asia and the Pacific and Africa. But we've seen trafficking happen in every single continent, in every single country. And I think the main goal is to raise awareness, because anyone who has a vulnerability that a trafficker can exploit will be forced into trafficking.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned raising awareness, which is so critical. And of course, that means also teaming up in partnerships with other organizations, the private sector, with the United Nations agencies. I know the United Nations International Labor Organization in particular has been in the forefront of combating human trafficking, but other agencies cooperate too, like the UN Children's Fund, the UN Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. They all cooperate together to some degree, but this is such a critical project, and you have to have cooperation. Even, it seems like there's been more of an awareness out there over the last 4 or 5 or 6 years. I know some of the airlines are training their employees on how to spot people who are maybe involved in human trafficking, who don't want to be involved and are taking flights between countries or even within countries. Do you see more of that cooperation?
Absolutely. I think this issue more than ever has really galvanized sort of anyone outside of the box to play a role in this issue. Everyone, from a community member to a professional in the field like law enforcement or service provider, to government agencies, to private industry, everyone has a role to play in this issue. Because it's such a hidden crime and a covert crime, it's often referred to as a crime that is hidden in plain sight. And unless you're looking for it, you won't know what to look for. You won't be able to identify it. So it's really great to see that industries such as the hospitality sector and the airline and transportation sector and the healthcare industry are really putting resources towards educating their staff that may come into contact with trafficking victims and be able to identify them and get them to assistance.
Well, it's certainly important to have that partnership, public-private partnership, to focus attention on this. I know this is a fast-moving, a very fluid area. You have people coming in, going out, that type of thing. It's a very shadowy area, so often we don't know who's involved in it. Do you have a ballpark estimate of how many people are being involved in human trafficking who don't want to be trafficked? Is there a ballpark figure that you use? Or it certainly would vary from country to country.
Right. So you mentioned the ILO, the International Labor Organization. They partnered with an organization called Walk Free International and released a report in 2017 that estimated that there are 40.3 million people globally in modern slavery. About 80%, so 29.7 million of those individuals are in forced labor. And the balance are in forced marriage. So that number is staggering. I think a large percentage of the victims that were identified were women, and furthermore, 1 in every 4 are children. Those numbers, again, are global estimates, and I think from reading the ILO report, it was just based off of a survey of 48 countries to sort of give you a sample of what trafficking could look like across the world. But as I said, the US doesn't have a national prevalence study. You've got countries that maybe are doing their own prevalence studies, but we don't know for sure what the total breadth of the issue is. But this gives us some indication that it's pretty high.
It certainly is. Of course, right now there are about 7.8 billion people on the planet,
Right.
but that's still a high number,
Right.
40 million, and that may actually be a low number
Right.
when you look at different areas.
Exactly.
Now, when you're talking about human trafficking also, you had a definition on that. Are these people who are involved in sex trade, or are there other aspects to it too, like being forced into employment? For example, let's say become indentured servants. And this has been a major problem, especially in the United States, in some of the Middle Eastern countries and what have you, where people are brought in from the Philippines or from Thailand and to work as domestic servants or whatever, or domestic help, and they can't get out.
Right.
I mean, they're actually imprisoned. Is that part of it too?
Right, so it's all of the above.
All of the
so
above.
the ILO uses the UN Convention or standard for trafficking, and it's a broader standard. It encompasses the same definition that I gave to you earlier, but it also includes forced marriage and organ trafficking, which are crimes here in the United States. They're just not crimes of human trafficking. And so that number encompasses that prostitution is a form of labor in other parts of the world, whereas in the United States, it's illegal. So just keep that in mind as you look at the numbers. But as I mentioned, out of 40.3 million, 27.8 are in forced labor, 27.8 million. If you break that down further, 16 million are individuals that are forced into private industries, so in construction, in domestic work, in agriculture, and other private industries like that. About 4.5 million are forced in the commercial sex trade, and then about 4 million-ish are forced in state-sanctioned forced labor, so prison camps, hard labor camps, manual labor camps, and the like. So a large majority of those cases are individuals that are forced into a variety of different industries like agriculture and forestry and landscaping and domestic work.
So it covers the waterfront. It can be
Exactly.
very broad. You mentioned one that we don't hear much about, or I haven't anyway, is organ trafficking. What exactly, how does that work?
So organ trafficking is when someone, you hear a lot about this, well, I hear a lot about it in the news, but then you also see it portrayed in a lot of movies where individuals are abducted and their organs are harvested and then are sold in the black market. That, under the international law, is a form of human trafficking because you're subjecting someone to exploitation and making a profit off of their exploitation. However, in the United States, the definition for trafficking is just relegated to sex and labor.
Now, these people who are kidnapped and their organs are taken forcefully, are they killed? I'm sure in some cases they must, or maybe they die by mistake. Now, you can donate a kidney or something like
Right.
that, but do they actually undergo an operation? They take the kidney, then put them back together, and they're free, or?
Yeah, I believe so. I don't believe that they are killed. I mean, it depends probably on the network that's exploiting that. I don't know much about the organ trafficking world, but I know some are abducted, their organs are harvested, they don't know what happened, and are probably released back into society, may die from complications from the surgery because these are not done in the most sanitary of conditions. Or they could be forced to do other things, just because it's not in my purview of work. I don't know much about it, but from what I've read, that seems to be sort of some of the circumstances.
It's certainly a very dangerous area, to put
Yes,
it mildly.
definitely.
It certainly
Definitely.
is. Yes.
I mean, and there's such a market for organs. You know, people are
Oh, exactly,
sick
right.
and dying all the
That's
time.
right.
so
You
there is
have
a
long
need.
waiting lines.
Right, exactly.
Excuse me, and people who really need transplants,
Right.
and in many cases can't get them for
Right.
whatever reason. So I can see where it'd be a very lucrative
Right.
type of activity. Now, you mentioned too about prostitution. This is an issue that comes up periodically. And there are places for example, if you think of the Netherlands, they have legalized prostitution there. They regulate it, is what they do. They know everybody registers. You get medical checkups every so often. They tax it. It's just another industry
Right.
in that country. There are some places in the United States, Nevada, there are little pockets out in Nevada where you can do that. But so often people equate, not only if it's a moral equation, that anyone who works as a prostitute, which they say that's the oldest profession in the world, and that's probably true, but anyone who works as a prostitute is being trafficked, is in human trafficking. I don't personally see it that way. How do you view that? Is that true or not true?
I mean, this is sort of a never-ending debate in the field, and you will have viewpoints on either ends of the spectrum. Mm-hmm. And I think the field is still evolving as it tries to answer this question a little bit more. And I think what we lack is evidence-based practices to see what actually is working. But I can tell you that we, in our work, follow the federal definition of trafficking here in the United States, and you do need those elements of force, fraud, or coercion to exist for adults in commercial sex activity. So prostitution on its own, without any elements of force, fraud, or coercion, does not fit the definition of trafficking. You do have some states, like Washington State, for example, in Seattle, where they are trying some of the Nordic models, like you mentioned, where they're focusing less on arresting the women or the individuals engaging in prostitution and focusing their efforts rather on the buyers of commercial sex. In fact, there are some states that have applied the human trafficking definition under the federal law to convict and prosecute buyers as offenders, or to the same extent as traffickers as well. So you do see an overall effort across the country to focus less on the women or the potential victims and direct them towards services, and then focus their efforts largely on the people buying and the people exploiting.
Mm-hmm. What types of services do we have available for people? I know you read articles periodically about how runaway girls have been extricated from the human trafficking ring, the human trafficking network. What types of services do we have to help them? I'm sure people need maybe physical assistance, maybe they need psychological assistance, that type of thing. And of course, this would vary from country to country, I'm sure, and maybe state to state or province to province, wherever it might be. But what types of basic services do we have available to help people to readjust or to get back into what we call a, quote, normal lifestyle?
Right. So, you have short-term needs such as shelter, food, housing, medical needs that need to be met when that individual first comes out of their exploitative situation. And then you've got the long-term needs, right? So if you're working with someone who came out of a labor trafficking situation, for example, and their documents were confiscated, they need immigration assistance. They need assistance from an attorney who can talk to them about their rights and what remedies that they may be eligible for here in the United States. You have maybe mental health, counseling, therapy needs that need to happen. For sex trafficking survivors, a lot of them that come out of pimp control trafficking, for example, are branded or tattooed by their traffickers, and as part of their recovery want that removed. Those are expensive services, so there are a lot of agencies that have banded together to provide those services either at low cost or at free of charge. Dental services, medical services, and then eventually education, right? And opportunity to be able to thrive and leave your exploitation in the past, and reintegrate back into society, as you said. So what kind of education programs are there? What kind of work opportunities are there? And you're seeing a lot of corporations and a lot of organizations that are putting their best foot forward and offering opportunities for survivors to learn and to grow and to become contributing members of society.
So we have educational institutions that are working with folks perhaps to upgrade their educational skills. We have private sector companies that are working to perhaps hire them as employees,
right,
and that type of thing. So we're seeing more of that.
So for example, here locally, I know there's a lot of work being done with TJ Maxx, for example, and not only are they helping create care bags for local organizations in Kentucky that they then provide to survivors of trafficking that either law enforcement or other frontline professionals encounter, but they're also offering management opportunities. So an opportunity to learn to work within the TJ Maxx Corporation and then move up the ranks and receive the necessary educational credentials to be able to survive and thrive.
One other area you mentioned that doesn't get a lot of publicity either is forced marriages. And when we think of forced marriages, we think Middle East, maybe India, something like that. But those are not the only two areas where that happens. We see it in the United States, Canada, South America, wherever.
Yeah.
How prevalent is that problem? And are we making any success, or do we have any success stories in helping to reduce those forced marriages?
So there is a fantastic organization based in Alexandria, Virginia, and then throughout the country called the Tahirih Justice Center. And they do a lot of work centered around forced marriage and raising awareness. So they just did a prevalence study a couple of years ago just to see that, or to ask the question, does forced marriage exist here in the United States and to what extent? And then use that evidence, unfortunately I don't have the data handy, but use that data that they gathered to then push for policy changes and potentially criminalize it federally here in the United States. So those are the efforts that are happening. There is a lot of work being done locally as well. And it's just great to see that it's an issue that's finally coming out into the limelight and that there's a lot of education and awareness being done.
Mm-hmm. And that's a very sensitive area too, because so often these are cultural issues. This is not a matter of human trafficking per se, I guess. I mean, it could be, I guess, classified under the particular definition, but this is what's been done in a particular society for eons and eons, and it's been passed down from generation to generation. And if you're living wherever it might be, if you're living in India and you have 8 kids and you have an income of $900, all of a sudden you realize that you're not going to be able to feed the children, and you're not going to be able to clothe them or to educate them or whatever the case might be. And so some person who is older but may have more money comes along and says, well, I'd love to marry your 10-year-old daughter or something like that, which sounds extreme, but it actually happens. It's very common in various parts of the world. So you have a sort of a clash of cultural values, do you not? And that how do we overcome that?
I think the first thing is to really stop looking at this as something that does not resonate with American culture, because American is a hodgepodge of so many different cultures and it's a melting pot of so many different types of religions and cultures and you name it. But it's not something that happens in Asian culture only, for example, right, or African culture, for example. It also happens here with so many different religious groups. Without calling attention to any one of them, you see that there are some sects or very conservative religious groups that marry within or marry their young girls off at a young age as well. And so I think as we're learning about the issue, to look at the issue holistically and to remove sort of that myopic lens of this happens in certain countries, and because of those countries have immigrated in their people to the U.S., that has been brought through their culture, because it is part of American culture, and I've seen it happen through stories here as well. And I think just embracing the issue and recognizing that it does happen here to the extent that it happens everywhere else in the world.
Exactly, it certainly does, yes. And we think of these issues as being over there,
right,
but they're not, they're here.
And that's the same struggle we had with trafficking, is that nobody wanted to believe that it happens here. And in our recent data from the National Human Trafficking Hotline, a large number of victims that we identified through the cases that we responded to were U.S. citizens and legal permanent residents. So it is affecting our communities.
It certainly is. Now, what are those hotline numbers again for our viewers?
Sure. So the hotline is 888-373-7888, or you can text us at 233-733.
Okay, very good. Now, Vanessa, as you look at this whole issue of human trafficking, where we were 10 years ago, where we are today, what can be done? Are there any recommendations you could make to maybe UN agencies, and I know many of them are on the front lines combating this, maybe to governmental agencies in the United States, Canada, Mexico, wherever, to help improve the situation and to help defeat this problem?
So keep up the great work. I think
keep
now,
moving.
Exactly,
That's right.
Now more than ever, we have an extremely educated public. 10 years ago, we were still struggling with trying to get people to wrap their heads around the issue. And now with all of the work that's being done at the grassroots level, at the national level, at the global level, through agencies, through nonprofits, through individual citizens, we now have a public that knows what trafficking is, and more so knows what to look for and knows where to call for help. That's fantastic. I think a great thing for the movement now is to move from just responding to cases. I think the more awareness there is, the more recognition there is of the issue, we're going to get more cases where people start to identify and ask for help. So yes, continue the fight through responding, but also work towards what does it look like to have a world without slavery one day? How do we get at eradication? Are the numbers actually decreasing over time? And Polaris is trying to do just that. Through 10 years of our hotline operations, we were able to come up with a fantastic breakthrough report called the Typology of Modern Slavery, which breaks down in the United States human trafficking into 25 different manifestations of what trafficking looks like here. Based on those 25, we can now do targeted strategies towards making those numbers in those individual networks go down. So ideally, I think governments need to support that, need to look at how to continue to build their infrastructure to respond to trafficking. Hotlines are an integral core part of a solid infrastructure to respond to trafficking. And then provide a solid safety net to protect survivors.
Mm-hmm. Well, Vanessa, those are excellent ideas, and hopefully the governments will take your ideas to heart and implement these policies, because this is such a critical issue, and it's one that we all have to coordinate and cooperate on if we're going to overcome it. And it's one that can really, it's just so prevalent, and we don't think about it because we don't see it so often, but so many lives are being destroyed, and we need to do everything we can do to do this. As you mentioned, there are at least 45 million people around the world, and that may be the tip of the iceberg. Right. It may be a lot worse than that. But Vanessa Chauhan, I want to thank you so very much for a very interesting and a very informative program.
Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us today on Global Connections Television.